Barakallahu feekum. He then completed his PhD at SOAS, University of London, under the supervision of the renowned Quran translator MAS Abdul Halim. The book, based on his thesis, is forthcoming with Edinburgh University Press, and perhaps you can give us a...
It's an old bio, but it's still forthcoming.
It's still forthcoming, inshallah.
It's not that forthcoming, but it's coming.
It's coming, inshallah. This year or next year, inshallah. Fatah Allahu alayna jami'an, inshallah. And is entitled Explaining the Quran Through the Quran. Dr. Sohaib is well known for his translation of classical works of tafsir. The first volume of Tafsir al-Kabir by Al-Imam al-Razi was awarded the Sheikh Hamad Award for translation in 2018, so he's no stranger to Doha, alhamdulillah. And further volumes, inshallah, will follow. I've also been in touch with him over the years to discuss certain translation projects, and I understand that you have a very great interest in Ibn Ashur's al-Tahir wa-Tanwir in particular. And so he has also written in academic journals and collections, including the Journal of Quranic Studies, the Encyclopedia of the Quran, published by Brill, the Handbook of Quranic Hermeneutics, published by De Gruyter, and about 20 translations for the blog, The Global Quran, out of the University of Freiburg. So, inshallah, without further ado, there's a lot more I could discuss, and you could potentially give us some updates on some of this information. But without further ado, I'd like to invite you to speak about what if Ibn Ashur translated the Quran.
Can we get up my slide?
Okay.
Yeah.
And inshallah, jazakumullah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Shall I say some more dua? واجعل لي وزيرا من أهلي هارون أخي. Okay? Okay, so?
Inshallah. This is more promising.
Yeah? So, as we're waiting for that to come up, as you've already seen, this picture of myself with a portrait of a very well-known mufassir, a commentator on the Quran, a scholar, a pioneer of the field of the study of maqasid in modern times, a scholar who has had tremendous influence in the East and the West, a scholar whose work still requires a great deal of study. In fact, in these very days, yes, today is the third day of a conference taking place in Tunis, where he was the rector of the Zaytuna Mosque and University, on the thought of Muhammad al-Tahir Ibn Ashur, who was born in 1879 and died in 1973. So just over 50 years have passed since he left this world, and sometime before that he completed a tafsir called al-Tahir wa-Tanwir, which is widely, almost universally considered one of the masterpieces, or indeed the masterpiece of Quranic exegesis in the 20th century. The 20th century being quite a busy time for lots of interpretations of the Quran, new approaches to understanding the Quran and explaining it, examining and re-examining ideas. And al-Tahir ibn Ashur's tafsir stands out in certain respects, in some ways not for its originality, but for, in a way, echoing a great deal of what has made the tradition of tafsir so strong, by renewing the old methods of investigation and adding new insights into the study of the language of the Quran, the imagery in the Quran, the eloquence of the Quran, and the miracle of the Quran. And at the same time, a tafsir which contains freshness of ideas, original interpretations. So this is just to explain why would I go to the lengths of calling a center which I set up the Ibn Ashur Center for Quranic Studies. In short, it is this blend between authenticity, rootedness in the tradition, respect for tradition, with originality, creativity, and the courage to go beyond what is in the tradition and to sometimes disagree with what has gone before in the works of tafsir. So, what you see here in this image looks far too crisp to be a genuine photograph of al-Tahir ibn Ashur, who died more than 50 years ago. I actually found this on the internet, that someone has done AI enhancement. And I thought that would be an interesting way to illustrate the project that I'm going to talk about, because we are doing a thought experiment here. What if Ibn Ashur translated the Quran? I hope it's a strange question to you. I hope it's not something you thought about before. If you did, then I'm going to try to show you how I'm answering that question, not just on a theoretical level, but through a project which aims to translate the Quran as if Ibn Ashur was the translator, right? So this is underway. If you don't like the idea, then it's too late to stop me. So you may say, who are you to translate the Quran? Not that many people have asked me this question, but if they do, and when they do, I will say, that's a very important question. And I would say we should always bring this energy to the question of Quran translation. We should always be asking, who are you, and who are we, and who are they, and who were they to translate the Quran? As the history of Quran translation has gone through many stages, we have here in the room, esteemed researchers and scholars and practitioners of the field as well. They know better than what I'm saying. But there were those, for example, who are termed the Orientalists or the non-Muslim students and scholars of Islam who translated the Quran into various European languages, for example, and into English. And who were they? Why were they doing it? What gave them the right to do it? But again, who was going to stop them? So within a certain paradigm, you don't need to ask for permission. And even to this day, in actual fact, nobody needs to ask for permission. If a person wakes up and says, I'm going to translate the Quran, they can start translating it. And they can publish it. And in the Muslim countries, they might face certain barriers to publication, but then you can just publish it in the West. You can just self-publish. You can publish through Amazon. There are people who wake up and decide to translate the Quran. So I didn't just wake up and decide, but I was using Quran translations since a young age. So I have at certain times been, it's been pointed out to me that I'm not a native speaker of Arabic. And there have been times where I almost accepted that this was some kind of handicap. But I'm going to push back now on this. As Dr. Osama kindly mentioned, I was honored with a prize for the first volume of Tafsir al-Razi that was here in Qatar. Then I went straight to Istanbul and I gave a talk there about al-Razi's great exegesis and the future of tafsir and translation. That was in late 2018. And actually at the end of that talk, which you can find somewhere on YouTube, I laid out the outline of this project that I'm talking to you about today. So I'm very happy that it went from a slide to, well, a slideshow now, right? And some actual work, which I'll show you inshallah, and get your thoughts about it. So during that talk, which I gave in the Darul Qurra in Istanbul, in the historic Sulaymaniya Mosque, there was a professor who attended, whom I will not name, who put it to me that what you should do when you're translating Tafsir al-Razi is you should work with a native speaker who will read the text and then you just make it into nice English. So I was like, thank you that you think my English is nice. But I didn't feel at that point I need a native speaker to mediate between me and al-Razi. I went to school with the native speakers in Al-Azhar. They were in my class and they're not doing what I do now. I didn't feel that they were, my immediate competition. Native speakers, native of what? In the field of Quran translation, are you a native of Quranic Arabic? A native of what? Classical Jahili Arabic? Nobody's a native of these things. And we know the situation. Those of us who have lived in the Arab world or studied in the Arab world, the immediate problem I had studying in Egypt was, well, nobody's speaking the Arabic that I learned in the class. Even the teachers, when they talk to each other, are not talking in the language that they're teaching us. They're undermining it in the break times. They're showing us that this is not a real language. So what does that nativity lend to that credibility? So anyway, being a user of Quran translations, I think is something which is an advantage when it comes to wanting to participate in the act of translation later on. Because I've suffered that need of that mediation of a translator. I was reading Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation as a teenager and thinking how wonderful it was and how much I got that, the spirit of his way of translating. But at the same time thinking, Yusuf Ali, I need you to get out of the way, please. I need to get past this stage of depending upon a translator, and I want to see what you see in the text, right? And I want to see what the greatest minds who look at the Quran see, and I want to read what they have to say. But I want to experience the Quran directly. So when a person asks me, and I get asked the question a lot, what's the best Quran translation? I've often facetiously said, mine, even though it didn't exist, right? Because it's just a matter of principle, just like the same, I believe that what's the best Quran recitation? It's not mine as me, but each one of us, when we actually recite the Quran for ourselves, we are experiencing something in that moment, which is the best thing. It's superior to anything that you listen to. I'm not saying you became better than Minshawi or better than Mu'aqqili or whoever you want, but I'm saying that for you, this is about connection and engagement. And translation is also a process. I think many translators came to the task wanting to understand the text. And I identify with that very strongly. The work that I'm doing now on tafsir Ibn Ashur is because of my thirst and need to understand as well as I can. And if that was the only greedy product that came out of this, was that I got to understand the Quran, I'm fine with that. But we are also producing an output which passes as much as possible of that understanding that I'm getting onto people who don't have to go through all the hard work to get there, but to package it in a way that will deliver it and make it easy. So I'm a user of Quran translation. I've studied Arabic. Now, I'm not here to talk about how much Arabic did I study or whatever. What I'm saying is the process of studying as well. You appreciate a language for its technicalities and you know its terms. If you ask me about some English sentences, is this right or should it be like this? I could probably tell you which is right. But could I tell you why it's right? Could I explain the grammar of it? This is an actual handicap of a native speaker. Native speakers usually don't know the language through its technical terminologies, right? So there can be another kind of advantage that comes through being a student who has then, of course, reached a certain level of study. Okay, I did a degree in tafsir in that field. I chose that field. I did a doctorate in the issue of usul al-tafsir, looking specifically at tafsir of the Quran through the Quran. Book is forthcoming, somewhat forthcoming, inshallah. It's just a matter of finding time. And have worked also on studying translations as they are. So aspects of the history, aspects of the features of the translations, seeing what translators have done, trying to understand all that they have gone through. And it's only when I've started actually the task of translating that you suddenly realize, oh, those things that I used to criticize people for, now I get it. Now I get it. This is really, really hard. And it's about making choices, right? And I often think about these dials on a like a spaceship or something, I don't know why. But you turn up this dial, and then if you turn that to the max, you can't have all of them to the max. You can't have all the fluency and all the clarity and all the accuracy and all the detail all at the same time. Something's got to give, right? Maybe Star Trek is from Scotty or something, Captain something's got to give, right? So if you want to turn things up, but naturally something might have to go down a notch because of it. So you decide as a translator, what am I prioritizing? What do I feel is really important? What am I trying to achieve here? How does my work, am I trying as a translator to produce the ultimate translation? which will stop anyone from ever needing another translation, ever in the future, will stop them having to look at any of the past translations? Or am I just participating? Am I adding something? Am I adding another angle so people could use my translation and they could still use other translations? They could find in those other places what I won't be able to give them here because I'm turning this dial up. So in this project, the tafsir of Ibn Ashur and the Ashur translation, there are certain dials that I'm turning up, and some others might have to go down. So we're turning up the dial of detail, right? The dial of detail, there are many famous translations which don't even have footnotes or have very sparing footnotes, right? So some of the most appreciated translations, I would say, are the least informative, right? They may be clear in giving that basic meaning that they want to put in the main part of the text, but the translator didn't see the need to add a lot of detail. In fact, they might have deliberately chosen, in fact, I'm sure this is the case, I don't want to weigh down the reader with lots of detail. I want them to appreciate the basic message of the Quran. But then how do I give that to someone who is looking for detail? And that's why that question doesn't make sense. What's the best translation? Because it's best translation for whom and for what purpose? And the best translation for you, as long as we're talking about the good, decent, accurate translations, is the one that you connect to, is the one that you find appealing, is the one that somehow moves you. We don't have to all be reading the same translation. And so I have engaged in the practice of translation, having done some of Tafsir al-Razi, having done some of al-Itqan fi ulum al-Quran. And actually al-Itqan came first. Al-Itqan was the training for Tafsir al-Kabir, because the work that I was doing in the select chapters of Itqan was specifically on the language of the Quran, the grammar of the Quran, the various meanings that a single word can have. These are the chapters that I was translating from Imam al-Suyuti. So the process of turning that into English, which is not necessarily in itself a very sensible thing to do. This is the problem. When these translation projects are commissioned, they're commissioned for all sorts of reasons. In this case, the translation of the Itqan was commissioned as something to highlight and showcase the greatness of Islamic civilization. The translation was not intended in the first place to be useful to anyone, to actually instruct you in Quranic language and to be a textbook for Quranic sciences. But naturally, when getting involved in it, I was like, I don't want this to be a thing to marvel at from a distance. I want this to actually mean something to me and mean something to people who could be my students in the future, right? So that work was an engagement for me which taught me. I had, if I can put it in such a strange and maybe pompous way, my tutelage under Imam al-Suyuti in this project, and then my tutelage under Imam al-Razi in the next project, and now my tutelage under Shaykh Ibn Ashur. Because in this thought experiment, you're going to have to humor me as I say some very strange things. Like the Sufis sometimes say that you're supposed to be like a dead body in the hand of the one washing it, right? This is the characteristic of the student under the hands of a master, a spiritual master. Maybe this is a caricature or something, but this is an expression that is used, right? So, in the case of this tafsir, I am trying as far as possible to be like the mayyit بين يدي غاسله وهو الشيخ Ibn Ashur. So I'm saying Ibn Ashur, who of course I did not have the honor to meet, I couldn't have, but I've met his grandson, if that helps. and I have touched his tafsir with my hands, alhamdulillah. But his books are speaking to me, right? And of course they could speak to any one of us. Any of us could go ahead and undertake a project like this, right? If you want to beat me to it, I'm giving away the game. You can do it first. Or you can pick another mufassir and have an experience like this. So that's why I want to share with you some of the thought process, the journey involved, because maybe there's something in it, and let's see what time reveals. So who am I? I would say this is a question that we should ask. We should be asking ourselves constantly if we're undertaking it. But then we should be willing to prepare an answer. An answer in this dunya, in this life, but also, of course, an answer on the Day of Judgment. How did I dare to do that? Right? There are a couple of papers which I've published in this field, you can say. One of them is a chapter in a book that was from a conference in Belgium, which was called Retranslating the Bible and the Quran. And my contribution was on retelling the surah of Joseph. And this was because one of the things that I had done by this point was participated in a collaborative translation project, which is called the Bayina translation, in conjunction with someone you may know, Ustad Nu'man Ali Khan, very famous teacher, preacher. He's been here, I'm sure, a number of times. So we engaged in a process of study of Surah Yusuf, which then culminated in translating it. And then I wrote this reflective piece on some things that we had, I felt, achieved through that. But I wanted to focus on one of the important theoretical bases here, which is, what's the role of tafsir? Where does it come in? And so I titled it, The Untranslated Quran. And here I was slightly making fun of the very, very common trope where people talk about the untranslatable Quran, or translating the untranslatable. Because we all know that there are certain things that we'd have to say in defense of the proposition that the Quran is untranslatable. And yet there are hundreds of Quran translations, even if we just spoke about English, well over 150 complete translations of the Quran. So it's proving translatable enough for something to be happening. But then there are things which may be beyond translation. Some things which are general to any high-level text in any language, to translate all the things that it contains is theoretically impossible. But then with the Quran itself being kalam, mu'jiz, that is divine speech, which it was revealed with the purpose of incapacitating those who would try to imitate it, that presents its own problems in the theory of it being translatable, right? But in the untranslated Quran, I wanted to say, okay, let's move on from the discussion of whether we can or we can't, because we're doing it. We are participating in the process of translating. But there are meanings in the Quran which translators haven't touched. And it would have been easy for them to touch them, because if you open up the books of Arabic tafsir, the Mufassirun are saying, here in this verse there are two meanings. You go to the translations, all of them are with the first meaning, first meaning, first meaning, first meaning, first meaning, until the end. So I'm saying, where's the second meaning? When Allah says, نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ, all the translators want to say, we tell you the most beautiful of stories, or they use a synonym, the fairest of stories, the finest of chronicles, right? You can choose synonyms, but it's all the same wajh of tafsir, right? Which is to say, أحسن المقصوص is the مفعول به. This is the grammar of it. نقص عليك, we tell you, and then the object of that is أحسن القصص, the best of stories, the fairest of stories, however you want. But the other way is, you see this as مفعول مطلق or as a masdar, meaning نقص عليك أحسن الاقتصاص. So we tell you the story in the best way, in the finest way, in the fairest way. And none of the translators touched this, except for Muhammad Asad, who then sort of changed it he changed it to something else. We explain the Quran to you in the best way. So he would have to explain how qasas became explaining. He does attempt to, and I don't think it's successful. But the point is, Muhammad Asad at least, pushed the boat out there on that translation. In the Bayna translation, we said we are going to lay the story out for you in the finest way. Not because this is necessarily the better interpretation. We might have been inclined to say it is the best contextual translation. But it's more a case of, can't we see in the whole corpus of translations some diversity that brings out for the reader who might be going on to a site like Quran.com, which I'm honored to be connected with, and they pull up the multiple translations, and they're not getting the diversity because the translators all went one way on this. Why did they go one way? Can be multiple factors. It's the most obvious meaning. It's the meaning that they thought about and preferred. Or they just kind of settled for what is commonplace, right? You don't even have to go to the extent of saying copying and plagiarism, but it's just, I've always heard it means this. That's what my heart inclines to. But why does it incline to it? Because you always heard it. And so the problem proliferates. So this paper is as passionate as an academic article might get, a plea to take tafsir more seriously and to look for the meanings that are contained in tafsir, which are untranslated, but can be translated. And then there was a paper which has just been published this year in the Journal of the College of Sharia here in Qatar University. And this is called Exegetical Quran Translation, Theoretical and Practical Considerations. And this kind of extends the questions around the use of tafsir in translation. It does a few things. One is it actually talks about Muhammad Asad as a case study. I chose Muhammad Asad to say Muhammad Asad actually is one of the most thoughtful translators of the Quran, but also one of the most transparent translators, because he will make choices and then tell you in the footnote where he got that from. But what that allows you to do, which is why I admire the bravery, is go and check his sources and say, well, when you claim that Al-Razi had this interpretation, which happens to align with your particular modern social norms, did Al-Razi really say that? And then I can go back and say, well, actually, no, I don't agree that Al-Razi said this. So the question is, because I wouldn't attribute dishonesty to the translator, but I would think, is there a competency issue in the reading? Is there an issue of seeing what you want to see to some extent? So this opens up the questions around, what do we expect to be the qualifications of a translator? Isn't a translator in some way a mufassir? If we say that translation of the Quran is a kind of tafsir, I think mostly people are in agreement with this proposition, then a translator is a kind of mufassir who either has to have the qualifications that we would describe a mufassir as having, or depend closely upon someone who does. Right? So either you are a mujtahid in this respect, or you're a muqallid. But if you're a mujtahid, you have to demonstrate that you have the qualifications of a mujtahid. Or if you're a muqallid, maybe explain, what am I following? What am I copying? What am I basing my views upon? Right? So, in there I talk about a particular format, which I'll elaborate in the next slide. It's called Predetermined Exegetical Translation. PET. PET is my pet name for Predetermined Exegetical Translation. Quran translation, we call it QT. It's too sweet, QT. So, PET is where you have a base tafsir and you translate the Quran based on that tafsir. And there hasn't been much that would follow this description. The kind of place where you might see it is when someone is translating a tafsir. So, I've worked on Tafsir al-Razi, for example. When I come to presenting in the book, we have the ayah and then al-Razi's explanation. I can't just paste in someone's translation, which then doesn't match what al-Razi is saying about the ayah, because this would create a tension between the two things. So the translation has to at least be consistent with al-Razi's explanation, at least to that level. It can't clash with it. And in the paper, I show some examples of where a translator has created this clash, right? The example was from Fi Dhilal al-Quran and the translation of that. The Quran translation was not matching the tafsir. So this shouldn't happen. But then you have a project like Jibril Haddad's work on Tafsir al-Baydawi. He actually talks about that he has set out to do a Baydawian rendering of the Quran. So I discuss in the paper a few problems that will affect us here. And those same problems will affect my work. Number one, the problem of lack of detail. There is a common misconception when it comes to mukhtasarat, brief tafsirs, concise exegesis. Many people think that the more concise a tafsir is, the easier it is. That's the first misconception. Whereas almost the exact opposite is true. A tafsir is concise because it's written for someone who knows how to unpack it. It's written for the specialists. Whereas the more extensive tafsir, or in other fields, those things are written for those who need things to be spelled out for them. Right? But then there's another problem. Many state projects, and I talk about the Egyptian experience, I talk about the Saudi experience, they are based on the idea that what we should do is we produce an Arabic tafsir, which should be a concise one, almost like we're doing a translation into Arabic of the Arabic. And then we give that to the translators in the world's languages and we say, don't translate the Quran, translate this instead. I think this is problematic on a number of levels. For one thing, I was just browsing one of these, two of them, and I looked at the ayah, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. The tafsir of it is, وَمَا هَذِهِ الَّتِي فِي يَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. Right? It's like the same.
Water with water.
Yeah. Water with water. Right? Yeah. We didn't see any point to that piece of translation. So, one of the problems is lack of detail. So, with Tafsir Ibn Ashur, we don't have that problem for the most part because Ibn Ashur is an extremely detailed tafsir in which the Mufassir is going to some length to explain how he's reading the text. If you don't have an explanation of how the Mufassir is reading the text, you don't have a basis for following that Mufassir in the translation process. But I'll tell you that there are some occasions where Ibn Ashur, took a day off from a few phrases here and there. So the problem of lack of detail does come up. But for the most part, Ibn Ashur is a detailed tafsir. It's suitable for this project, whereas many other things are not. Right? Number two, multiple interpretations. The nature of tafsir, as I mentioned before, is that mufassirs like to tell you a number of different ways that an ayah can be read. Ahsan al-qasas. Is this as a maf'ul bihi or as a maf'ul mutlaq? Would it have this meaning or that meaning? And this translation and that translation. The mufassir won't go to the bit about translation. That's where we need to intervene and take it to the next step. But that is a positive feature of tafsir, but a tricky feature in translation. Because how are you going to put all the multiple interpretations in? It's not impossible, but it's a problem. So as long as you are thinking about pages and paper and space, you are going to struggle with this. But once you think about the digital world, suddenly possibilities open up. And I'll show you that, inshallah. The third problem is a subtler one. Underdetermination, by which I mean, it's a bit like the point of lack of detail, but let's say you have to make a decision based on something. This is because I couldn't plug it in earlier. Could you do me a favor and just plug this in? Yeah. So it's related to lack of detail, but just a slightly different point, which is, for example, Jibril Haddad, when he translates in his Baydawian rendering, when he translates the name Allah, he writes the one God. The one God. So my question would be then, as a researcher, did al-Baydawi give you any tawjih, any direction in translating it that way? We all know Allah is the one God. That's not surprising. But to render the word in this way, did he say somewhere, Allah يعني الإله الواحد, الإله الوحيد? Did he give some direction like this? I don't think so. And in fact, I think this led to a certain absurdity because, for example, in the verse, the mushrikun say, ماذا أراد الله بهذا مثلا? They refer to Allah, but the translation says that the polytheists say, what did the one God mean by this example? That's absurd. And we shouldn't blame al-Baydawi for it, is what I'm saying, right? So the underdetermination then means, of course, the translator can't actually be the dead body. You have to open your eyes sometimes and say, I have to make a decision. So in that way, I will, of course, admit my responsibility for the translation I'm doing, right? But insofar as it's possible, I'm trying to relegate all the decisions to Ibn Ashur, but I can't always. So you may be wondering, what do I do about the name Allah? I mean, this is a big sticking point, right? You'll have faced questions about this. Which word did you use in the study Quran?
We just used God.
God.
And we had the debate. Went on back and forth for actually
I'm having it
years.
I'm having it with myself and with the YouTube comment section as well, right? Because we put out some videos and then people get very angry about this because I have chosen to use the word God. Now the thing is, I can't ask Ibn Ashur, are you okay with that? Because if he said yes, then khalas, end of story. Ibn Ashur said it's okay, so it's okay according to our project. And you can disagree with him in whatever you want, but you can't disagree that he knows what he's talking about, right?
You can create a large language model on the basis of Ibn Ashur's work.
So I'm the small language model on the basis of it. Yeah, so we can do those things. In fact, there are ways, I'm thinking to ask his grandson, does Ibn Ashur have any writings in French? Did you ever see him writing Dieu instead of Allah? For example, we could do istidlal. But in Surah Al-Fatiha, he talks about the name Allah. He talks about how the name is derived and that it comes from Al-Ilah. But then there is a special type of assimilation that's happened here, that this alif lam and then the merging and then the heavy letter and all this is a type of raising of that name into a special type of alamiyya, or being a proper name of a special kind. So it shouldn't be translated the God. But I would contend, I would argue, and if I was in a conversation with Imam Ibn Ashur, I would say, Sayyid al-Shaykh, I would suggest that all what you just said about the alif lam and the merging is what happens with the capital G in God. So I would replace that effect in Arabic with this effect in English, because you don't have capital letters in Arabic. Sah? You don't have them. So the capital G has a function, and you know this thing that people say, but God can be plural and God can be feminine and you can be this God and that God. Okay, but you don't put a capital G in those cases, right? You don't say all the gods with a capital G. That's a small g. So the argument can be made. I don't know for sure Ibn Ashur would accept it, but I need to be able to provide my, if ever, Ya Rab, I get to Jannah and I have to explain to him what I did, I want him to be happy with my explanation and say, Ahsanta ya Sohaib. That's all. That's all that I want, right? But this is a thing that people also can get very touchy about, so I'm considering reconsidering.
You're right, and in addition, you didn't add something from yourself, like only God. You didn't add anything from yourself. You just translated.
It's a translation question.
Yeah, and the question, if you keep Allah, it may create confusion for the reader.
Yeah.
Because personally, a French guy asked me, I told him I'm talking about Allah. He said, told me, who is Allah? But if I say Dieu, he will understand immediately what I'm referring to. Because the concept of God as the creator of the universe is universal.
Yeah.
But they'll understand it easily, no need for more explanation.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, I've long been convinced of the validity of saying God, capital G, God, instead of saying Allah. There's a very good paper on this by Umar Farooq Abdullah I read many years ago, One God, Many Names. It makes the case very clearly. So the validity is there, but still the choice is there for a translator. And these things can depend on the intended audience of the translation, A Muslim audience might feel happier and warmer and more spiritually enriched by reading the name Allah. But if you're thinking about the universality of the translation, then the argument that you made also is very important, and I agree with you, right? So the question why Ibn Ashur, let's be quick about it. Ibn Ashur, his tafsir contains a depth of analysis which extends what has been done in previous texts. He is also a recent mufassir, and this is a helpful fact. I have a secret agenda which I'm going to tell you, so don't tell anyone. The secret agenda is that by studying this tafsir well and gathering its benefits in a way that's accessible to everyone, we can just raise the bar on the level of Quranic knowledge in our age. If Ibn Ashur arguably represents the pinnacle of tafsir of the 20th century, then studying it well opens the horizon for whatever tafsir will be in the 21st century. But until we study what has been done, we can't really build on it, move on, and be innovative and creative, right? So that's the idea. And also that he is a very respected person. I travel in different countries and I say I'm the founder of Ibn Ashur Center. So far, it's all smiles that I get from all the different sects and groups and madhabs and anti-madhabs and whatever, right? Ibn Ashur, is a very resonant name and accepted name, despite the fact, obviously, he has his own belonging to specific schools. So what you see here, this snapshot is from a video. It's 9 minutes long. I'm not playing it now, but you can find it on YouTube. It's called Imam Ibn Ashur, Life and Legacy. So this kind of gives a snapshot of Tunisia, where he's from, and some of his context. And then you get to see in there his grandson, and you get to see the copy of his tafsir. So do check it out.
Beards, mashallah.
I hadn't noticed, but I'll take that. It's more of a comment than a question, yeah. So let me tell you about some key features of the translation that we're working on. So, meeting of two minds, you got the idea now where I said, okay, I want to be like the dead body in the hands of its washer, but in fact, we have to be honest and say there is agency, there is choice that's coming from me, and more minds as well. We have more members of the team, we have people supporting the work, because that's one of these important things. I told you that a person can wake up and translate the Quran and no one will stop them. I wish someone would stop them most of the time. But we have what we call an embarrassment of riches of Quran translations in English. An embarrassment of riches. So, I don't think that someone would get up and do that for the Bible. I think that other communities have imposed stronger standards and expectations, that it would be by a committee of experts, and it would be reviewed through several stages before the thing gets the go-ahead to start. Of course, the Quran is smaller in a way. Like in volume, it is smaller than the New Testament, right? So, anyway, there should be a sense of like, how do we actually do group work to avoid falling into mistakes? I won't go into it just now. The famous translations I could quote to you if you ask me, some howlers of mistakes that they have published. And even then in the front cover it says, and this was read by 70 native speakers from the native tribes of the British Isles and the Americas, right? And the question is, how did 70 people miss that mistake? So it raises questions about when you claim that it's got this review process, does it? Even when you claim that it's based on these tafsirs, is it? Or is it just a case of, when I felt that I didn't understand it, then I looked at the tafsir. But other times I was suffering under the delusion of, ability and self-confidence, right? And then on the back it's got the stamp from such and such prestigious university. And anyone who went to that university knows that if you talk to the right person on the right day with the right amount, and you get the stamp, right?
That's exactly why we didn't get one for the study Quran.
If you're going to go to someone to verify the translation, who am I going to give my translation in those countries who I would trust to judge my English? Right, I did a presentation once about Pickthall's experience in Egypt. It's heartbreaking and hilarious in equal measures, Pickthall. But they ended up, pulling him up on some specifics which was unjust. They said, when you have translated, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ يَدَكَ مَغْلُولَةً إِلَى عُنُقِكَ وَلَا تَبْسُطَهَا كُلَّ الْبَسْطِ. Pickthall translated it along the lines of, don't make your hand tied to your neck, nor stretch it out entirely. So of course he's following a kind of literal translation here, but then he was criticized for that by the Azhari critic, because they said, well, you have made it sound like it's about physical postures. Don't do this and don't do that. Whereas what's meant is, don't be stingy and don't be excessive in spending. So Pickthall actually responded to that. And this is back in the 1930s, bear in mind. He said, this is because I know that the English reader is smart enough to understand the idiom and what's intended here. And that you, as the Arabic critic here, don't understand the mentality of the people that I'm translating for. Pickthall understood this very well. He didn't wake up one morning and translate. He was a famed writer. People were waiting for his work. Please translate the Quran for us. That's different from just deciding to do it. But interestingly, I picked up a little booklet by one of the professors in Al-Azhar that was done in 2010. And it's a critical analysis of Pickthall's translation. And it's got exactly that same criticism that was made about 80 years prior. And he's unconscious of Pickthall's response to it, or, this is sometimes the level of analysis and criticism that's done. So, how did I get into all that? Because I like to rant. But the features of the Ashur translation, digital and print. And here the order is important. This is unusual as a translation because it is first conceived of as a digital product before it is a print product. And actually, in a way, like this happens when you just write on a word processor. But you're looking ahead to it being a printed book. But we are thinking about Quran.com. We have an agreement with Quran.com and support for this project from Quran Foundation, which is the non-profit which runs Quran.com. An encouragement to produce this as something that will help move forward the way that Quran translations are experienced. So digital and print. The print part is the harder thing to see how we're going to replicate many of the things in digital when we come to be bound by the pages of a book. Normally the problem happens the other way around. You print it and then you're like, how do we digitize this? We're thinking about it the other way around. The translation is based on layers. I'll show you this, inshallah. It has clarifying notes. And here's a question that I get a lot regarding this project. If the notes also are based on Ibn Ashur, what happens if you disagree with Ibn Ashur? I say, great question, and thank you for realizing that I can disagree with Ibn Ashur. That is allowed. I consider it perfectly allowed. But for the most part, the job is to present his view. But at the same time, I feel I've got a responsibility to the public that is going to read this. And occasionally we might feel the need to comment somehow on his opinion, or to give an alternative, or to contextualize it in some way, or to suggest other readings on that subject, right? So I think that is valid, as long as you don't then attribute the other view to Ibn Ashur. It will also have his introductions. He's got 10 introductions to his tafsir, which lay out his hermeneutics. And inside the tafsir, you get these sometimes page-long, several page-long discussion of certain issues. They are not described by him as essays, but we are looking to extract those and turn them into essays, which then we put in a separate volume with the introductions. Why? So that the main part of the commentary is not clogged by lengthy discussions. It has to retain a uniform ease of reading, a basic length of explanation, which then allows you to put certain things elsewhere. And then his lexicon. So the idea is, The current projection is this would be 5 volumes when it comes to print. 3 volumes which are, let's say, for 1/3 of the Quran each. And then 1 volume at the beginning, which is the introductions and essays. And 1 volume at the end, which is his dictionary of Quranic words and expressions. So this is something that is part of the process of translating. You realize for the need of consistency, for the need of making very informed choices in translation, that you should build a glossary or a lexicon of translation. But we're also looking to make this something that can reach the end user, like it can be tidied up and made something beautiful actually. Even in Arabic that doesn't exist, Ibn Ashur's dictionary of the Quran, where you can look up under each root, right? Because of course what he does is he explains in all different parts of the tafsir. And sometimes his explanation in one surah will be slightly different from his explanation of the same word in another surah, for various reasons. But wouldn't it be nice to put those together, to consolidate them, to remove the repetitions, to highlight the things which have come up in one place, right? Come up in one place. And it would be helpful to know in the other places, right? So this is one thing that we already put out to the public, right? I can report that there was some happy reception, quiet happiness mostly, no takfir. So generally everything went okay. Could have been better, but could have been worse. So we have this PDF and even a course as well. If you want to access the PDF, you just go to this ibnashur.com/Yasin. You put in an email address and then you receive it. And the PDF is of this, right? So this is the only print copy of it. Actually, this was a sample, which we didn't mass produce. But this was an attempt at also getting it into what is the layout going to be, how is the typesetting going to be. And, what we did there is not the final format. It was, one example. So I'll show you some of that. What you're going to see here is some elements which I can explain by means of the process. Actually, what I'll do is I'll jump forward and back a bit. So this is just an example of what we've got on the left. On the left, we have something that's quite typical in terms of layout of Quran translations. You have the Arabic text, you have next to it the specific verse in English. I have a friend who has been really banging the drum on the issue of paragraphs and very much believes in the importance of paragraphs in translation. And I have a lot of agreement with that point. But then also I noticed that Ibn Ashur talks about the importance of the unit of the ayah. So I want to respect Ibn Ashur's sense of the connectedness and the flow of paragraphs, but also his sense of the fact that ayahs stand alone. So this is a compromise, one thing happening here, one thing happening there. The text of the Quran we have put in the reading of Qalun and Nafi', because in Tunisia that's what Ibn Ashur was using, and therefore there's a term that I invented that people have been using, apparently, hafs-normativity. Hafs-normativity is where we pretend that Hafs is the Quran, and then even anything that wasn't in Hafs, we just change it to Hafs, and that results in some discord and clash as well sometimes, right? So the translation will match with Qalun, but of course, being a detailed tafsir, he will, for the most part, also explain what the other readings mean, and so that is also incorporated, right? So let's just, I'll go back a little bit here to the elements and process. Each word in the translation, I'm doing my utmost to see what does Ibn Ashur want this to be translated as. And, even in the end, if it looks a lot like other translations, it got there by a different process, right? So if I show you this, by the perfected Quran, right? This is a more expanded version of it. But even here, Yasin, by the perfected Quran. This is because his preferred view about Al-Hakim, rather than being primarily meaning containing wisdom or the wise Quran, which is a valid meaning, he prefers to say it means Al-Muhkam. It has been put together in the best way. So that's why he sees as the best meaning or the clearest meaning or the most apparent meaning of Wal-Qur'an al-Hakim. So the translation reflects that. Okay? I don't rush and say, what do I think Hakim means? No, I say, tell me. Okay, once I've taken what you've said, maybe I'll have to go and look at this in the rest of the Qur'an now as well to make sure I'm getting the full perspective on his view on Hakim. And then we put one word. I'm not going to write a whole, page here. We will in the lexicon. But here in the translation, we're not trying to burden the reader with a whole explanation of the word Hakim. We're just going to try to put the best word that we can put in the translation that does the job as best as we can. But then there is so much that can't go into this layer of the translation. So that's where you get the expansion. So, Yasin was the first thing that we completed. So, be kind, okay? So, in ayah 1 to 4, here I've placed a heading. The heading is inspired by the way that he talks about the ayat, but he doesn't provide headings, okay? So, it starts by talking about the Qur'an and the Prophet, and then it talks about a people in need of revelation. So you see here, Yasin, that's a big question. How are you going to translate these letters? I won't explain it right now. By the perfected Qur'an, I just sat with myself and realized nobody says by anything. Maybe by God. No one says that even. By Jove, maybe. By the power of Grayskull. I couldn't think of any examples in real life that anyone says by and they're doing an oath or swearing by something. Maybe you can think of it. So I realized that we'll have to spell this out for someone who's not familiar with that Quranic usage. So it became I swear by. And then I was like, but if I just write I swear by, who's swearing? Who's speaking? Am I going to assume that the reader knows that God is the speaker of the Quran? Oddly enough, I was just recently, there was a translation of Surah Yusuf done by a professor in the US, Muslim professor. And his translation is, it turns out that he wants to see that the narrator of the Quran is Jibreel. And I find it very odd, and I did challenge him on that, but anyway, in his translation, when he did a sort of dramatized presentation of Surah Yusuf, he did like scripted parts, right, like a play act. A very interesting idea, I think. But then the parts where we would generally say that God is speaking, he's got Gabriel speaking, which I found very strange. So sometimes you have to spell things out that you didn't think you'd have to spell out, but we need to, show these translations to, if you like, ummiyin. I don't mean illiterate, literally, but what I mean is people who don't come with prior assumptions and they're reading a translation, knowing what a translation should look like, but we need to ask them, what do you get when you read this? This, I think, is really a missing link in a lot of translation work. So what you see here in between the bold words are words of tafsir. Now, of course, the bold words are also tafsir, but they're the translation tafsir. And then the bits in between are the elaborated tafsir, the expanded glosses. Some people have looked at this and they said, this looks like tafsir al-Jalalain. I was like, that was not on purpose, but again, I'll take it. Because what we've done is created something like that in English, which is hard to do if it was written in Arabic and then translated. There are 2 translations of Tafsir al-Jalalain, strangely enough. Al-Tarjumatayn al-Jalalain. Right? So we have these things attempted. But here, what I've done is I've taken each word here, it could be like a paragraph. Right? So where you see, for example, on the right, would warn a people around you whose recent forefathers were not warned. The word recent is standing in for a whole discussion where he says, but isn't it the case that there were messengers sent to the Arabs before, like Ismail alayhi salam? So how can it be said that their forefathers were not warned? They were warned. Yes, but in recent times they were not. So we just put the word recent, and it does all that work. So if I go back a bit to the elements, we've got grammar. The grammar follows what Ibn Ashur says. And we've got forks. I will talk about forks through examples, inshallah. We've got the text of the translation. We've got the insertions, which is translation and tafsir. We've got notes, which I'm not really showing you, but we have, like you to understand that generally a translation benefits from having footnotes. But I don't like the implication of the footnotes, right? Maybe these things get ignored because of the position. So let's think about that digitally as well. And I want to mention to you that in the course of the work, we have started to use AI. I didn't in the beginning. But once I've done some translation, so I completed Surah Al-Baqarah, it's lengthy enough for me to then say to the AI bot, based on what you see here in this translation of Al-Baqarah, can you produce a draft of this next surah? And then it provides something to work from, right? A starting point. You can also ask it, take Ibn Ashur's tafsir here in Arabic and summarize it for me in English. This it does a very good job of. Right? The one we're using at the moment is Gemini. We had good results with Gemini. It's Google's product. It started to get very smart. We started to call it Al-Imam al-Jumayni, right? Because it's displaying some madahir al-nubugh, right? Maqsood ya Sheikh. So sometimes it comes up with obviously mistakes. You can't just pass this straight out to the public, but in the process of summary, it does a very good job. In the process of helping with thought process and giving a basis to work off, it does a very good job. So we would also be a bit silly not to use tools that are available. Just like if we said, I'm not going to do a Google search, I'm not going to check anything of previous translations, we would be remiss. Yeah.
But I think using AI can impose on you, or just when you see something already prepared, like well cooked, you just take it. And you just, instead of using your brain from the beginning, you just have something very nice, and this may mislead you in the direction that you are going to.
Yeah. There is a balance to be struck.
Yeah.
The more that I use the AI, the more I also feel the value of human struggle. But I will say I have struggled enough. The point is, right? I am glad that I did not use AI for Tafsir al-Razi. I did not use AI for Al-Itqan. Therefore, I feel Gordon Ramsay, I can decide if it's well cooked, right? I will judge for myself if I feel it's well cooked. But it's a case of, just like having research students who help you to do some of the work. They reduce some of the mental strain of the vast number of processes involved, that some of those processes become easy. Yeah, this is the idea. But definitely, there is a danger. So is the translator replaceable? Inshallah, no. Are we out of time?
No, but we want to leave some time for questions as well.
Okay. Well, how long do you suggest that I show some examples?
So technically we're up to 1:30, but we
Including questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
we could do another 10 minutes.
طيب, inshallah. So I wanted to show you some examples just to, show you what that kind of looks like. So with Yasin, I showed you here in the beginning. Then I wanted to jump ahead to a bit in Yasin that would kind of demonstrate the value of doing this. I think there are numerous points of value that I can argue for doing this. But one of them would be, there may be meanings that come in this translation that have never appeared in translation before. And the reason is because translators were not using Ibn Ashur and because they didn't have the tafsir acumen of Ibn Ashur. So Ibn Ashur is presenting a different take on the ayah even than earlier mufassirin. So what happens when that happens? Great things happen, right? So in Surah Yasin, later in the surah, وَلَوْ نَشَاءُ, here in the end of the surah, there is a part which it can be difficult to understand. Where does this fit in? How does this fit in and connect to the rest of the surah? But based on what Ibn Ashur explains, I've put a heading that will immediately orient you to what is the point here. That saves a lot of effort. You're getting the result of Ibn Ashur's tadabbur in the word believers be patient. You're suddenly going to understand that what Allah is saying here, if Ibn Ashur is right in his interpretation, is that you may expect that God will intervene and punish those who are opposing you, but you have to recognize that Allah will do things as and when He decides. So believers, be patient. And believers, if we willed at any time to force those idolaters to change their ways, we could blot out their eyes. They would hurry to find the path to safety. But how could they see it? And if we willed, we could deform them and confine them upon their present locations as soon as they rejected their messenger. They would be unable to move ahead to their destinations, and they would never go back, as they would lack physical and mental capacity. So there's some gloss and explanation that helps to understand what these words are saying. And the idea is, after reading that, you can go back one step to the unexpanded translation, and when you read it again, you actually understand it with these additional elements. But you see them within those words. These are things which are, in a way, buried within the words of the Quran, rather than a completely separate kind of tafsir, which is a whole elaboration or narrations and things like that. But then the next ayah is where it gets particularly interesting. وَمَن نُعَمِّرْهُ نُنَكِّسُ فِي الْخَلْقِ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. This is in the reading that he's using, in the other reading, أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ. But if we grant more life to some, we overturn their status among the creation. So will you not understand? This is an unusual translation. I don't think you'll find something like it, because he's reading the thing differently from the common way, that is, whoever we grant long life, we reverse them in creation. That is to say, once they become old, after having become taller, they start to become shorter. After they reach the prime of their intellect, they start to decline. This is, of course, a valid meaning. This is what the Mufassirun generally say. But then Ibn Ashur says they are struggling to explain why this point is made here. So Ibn Ashur is led here by the question of the nazm, the connection, the flow, the relevance of the ayah. So he's saying, what's intended here is, وَمَن نُعَمِّرْهُ, whoever we give more time, any nation like the Quraysh who are rejecting you and opposing you and getting your way, if we do give them more time, this is not a favor to them. The time will come when we flip over their status, fil khalq, that's to say, among the creation. He justifies it. You can go also and read his Arabic tafsir for the justification. I'm not his lawyer. Maybe I am, but I'm his student now, right? So I can defend it, but the point is, this is his tafsir. And what we get then is an idea presented in translation that possibly was never going to come to you, were it not for this project. If we grant more life to some of these idolaters instead of destroying them, we overturn their status, making them debased among the creation after days of glory. So will you believers, in the reading أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, will you believers not understand God's wisdom and stop asking Him to hasten on the punishment of your enemies? Okay.
It's like Israel today. It's very applicable to the situation of Islam and Palestine as well.
Right. Absolutely. And in fact, you don't have to also cast aside the other meaning. Because I don't think Ibn Ashur ends up saying this, but he could easily say, and this is in line with his general methodology, that both meanings are intended here. Right? So, in that respect, we have these things which I call forks. How do we handle the multiple interpretations of the same thing? It's easier once we have the digital methods to toggle between interpretations. I'll show you a kind of rough mock-up of that in a moment. But in Surah Yusuf, for example, I went through to find, what are some interesting forks. The first one I've mentioned to you, Ahsan al-Qasas. Is it the best storytelling or is it the best stories? وَنَحْنُ عُصْبَةٌ. Does it mean even though we're a strong band? Which was the translation that I did of this in the past. Or is it even though we're strong enough, meaning to deal with Joseph? This is the second meaning that he sees in it. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْهِ, we inspired Joseph, you will inform them while they don't realize it's you. And the other meaning which is mentioned by the Mufassirin, and this was surprising to me actually when I read it, we inspired Jacob, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْهِ, referring to Jacob, the father. لَتُنَبِّئَنَّهُمْ. This is actually a command. Inform them. You must inform them of this. And then, but they perceived not that Jacob was receiving this revelation. And it's another way of reading the same words. So I don't think any translation probably reflects it. The Egyptian who bought him said to his wife, or the Egyptian who bought him for his wife said. We might find both of these in the translations because it's possible translators looked at it one way or the other and chose one. Let's see. And a very famous one, فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّهِ. Satan made Joseph forget to mention his Lord. Or Satan made the cupbearer, the prisoner, forget to mention him to his Lord, the king. This is a famous divergence. Ibn Ashur is of the view that we should combine these, that in a way one is the cause for the other, that Satan made the cupbearer forget to mention, the other way around. Because Joseph forgot to mention Allah at this point, so as a kind of chastisement, Allah allowed it to be that the cupbearer was made to forget to mention Joseph, so he stayed in the prison. I'm uncomfortable with this interpretation, by the way, but it's not for me to say. Surah Al-Baqarah, هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا. So I've completed Surah Al-Baqarah. You know, it's a big thing, right? Alhamdulillah, Surah Al-Baqarah was a big milestone, but now going back and reviewing and revising it. Just here's an example of a very unusual take. Let's read it first without the expansion. It was He who created for you everything on earth. Moreover, He gave His attention to the heavens and formed them as 7, and He has knowledge of all things. Hopefully you didn't notice anything that strange happening, and formed them as 7. Okay, but now let's expand it. It was He who created for you as a favorite creature everything on earth for you to enjoy and benefit. Moreover, He gave His creative attention to the heavens and formed them perfectly as 7 planets. 7 planets. And He has knowledge of all things and creates accordingly and is deserving of all worship. So planets. Ibn Ashur has a theory that what's intended by the Sab'a Samawat, when the Quran speaks of that, is the 7 planets of the solar system other than Earth. So it's not for now the subject to go into why does he think that and is that okay, etc. But knowing that he says that, then I've worked that into the second layer of the translation, because I don't think it was quite the right thing to do to say and form them as 7 planets in the main line of the translation, right? But that's a judgment call. I won't go through this example, but essentially what I'm showing you here is, you know, passages which are commonly misunderstood or hard to understand, quoted by people who are attacking Islam and the Quran. You know, if we're able to give people a translation that provides that little bit of the context, not in a footnote, but embedded in a way, then you're able to see what's intended when it says fight them in what circumstances, who specifically, for what reason. It's there in the ayahs, and it's there in the tafsir, but the translations struggle a lot of the time to present these things because the format that translations have chosen, for the most part, isn't really able to carry it. But this translation is. And then tomorrow, inshallah, we are doing a presentation of Surah Al-Mulk. And in that presentation, you would see, I put more, tomorrow.
In the auditorium.
In the auditorium after Jummah, inshallah.
If anyone's interested, please join.
So this is an example of the fork, and I'll end on this, right? Supremely blessed is He who holds all sovereignty and who is capable of all things. He who created death and life to make it known which of you are better in action, and He is the mighty, the forgiving. So you see the thing I put in green here. This is one way, just when I'm using a slideshow, I can put that in a color which signifies to you that there's something else that could have been written in this green space, right? So the next slide changes that. Supremely blessed is He by whose hand the kingdom exists. So the grammar behind this, and imagine some people think that you should translate tafsir. Oh, you know, I've done that myself. But imagine telling you either the ba is sababiyya or is dharfiyya. Either al-mulk has the meaning of the masdar or it has the meaning of the maf'ul bihi, or the meaning of the maf'ul, right? Or the ism, basically. So we do that in the translation. We say either it's dharfiyya, in whose hand is all sovereignty. But here I've opted for a more idiomatic way here. But in case anyone gets upset, you know, you must place the hand, the word hand is there. Well, on the other one, I've put it there, don't worry. By whose hand the kingdom exists, because His other way of reading it is بِيَدِهِ بِسَبَبِ يَدِهِ al-mulk, which is to say the creation, exists. Right? So then we have the other layer where we expand it. Supremely blessed and praiseworthy is He, because what was missing from supremely blessed, as obviously it falls very short of the meanings of tabaraka, but tries to capture some of it. But then part of it was, this is a word of thana, of praise. So I put that in the second layer so that it doesn't become too unwieldy in the first layer. Supremely blessed and praiseworthy is He who holds all true sovereignty. Now, whole paragraphs can be written about the word true. Why true? I'm not going to say it right now. By whose hand the kingdom is this. And who, unlike the false deities, is capable of every potential and has power over all things. He who showed this power when He created death and life. You see the nazm, the flow. This is now like al-biqa'i, right? Rather than jalalain. Including in you humans, to make it known which of you are better and worse in action in this life. And when you return to Him after death. You see, al-mawta wal-haya then is connected to what's after that. When you turn to Him after death, He is the mighty in retribution, the forgiving towards sincere servants. So, I will leave it there so we have a chance for some questions and discussion, inshallah, in what remains of our time.
I think this was really sort of an illuminating, actually, hour and 15 minutes or an hour and of very rich material, and clearly you've been working at this for so long and bring so much experience to the table that we could probably go on for another hour and 15 minutes without hesitation.
I'll hang around after if anyone wants to talk, inshallah.
I can see Dr. Abdul Fattah, his hand's gone up straight away, and then Ustad Dr. Abdullah as well, and then brother in the back. Jazakumullah khair. So if I can ask, and then the brother here. So if I can start with Dr. Abdul Fattah, and if it's okay, maybe should we take a couple at a time, and then...
If that works, yeah.
We'll take the two of you, and then inshallah we'll come to yourself. So Dr. Abdul Fattah, and then yourself.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khair for this very interesting presentation. I just have two questions, Dr. Sohaib. The first one is, Ibn Ashur is known as Usuli Maqasidi. And definitely, when we, for example, when we compare Sayyid Qutb, في ظلال القرآن, and Ibn Ashur al-Tahir wal-Tanwir, definitely you see that the Mufassir himself, because of his focus and his the knowledge he carries and so on, impacts his tafsir, basically the way he interprets basically the ayat. And of course there is like an experience going on between the Quranic text and the Mufassir himself, basically. So the point I wanted to raise is how far Ibn Ashur, being Maqasidi and Usuli, has a print on his tafsir, basically, because it's this is very, very kind of probably issue when it comes to the tafasir that have been before. Second issue, which is, I really thank you for what you have raised today, which is very, very important. There is no one single kind of language in terms of its terminology and words and so on that can give a standard tafsir somehow. You mentioned that, to have a tafsir in Arabic first and then you, because when you come, for example, Yusuf Ali's tafsir and then the post-Yusuf Ali kind of tafasir, only in one language, which is English, you can see the differences in terms of the use of the terminology and the wording and so on. And sometimes, of course, there is elements of kalam or aql gets in, while maybe some other schools, they don't have that space. So they do the literal translation. And then you have the issue of governance, that this tafsir to be governed. Of course, you mentioned the committees that made the reviews and so on and so forth. But there is, other tafsir in other languages taking from the English tafsir, as it is the case, for example, some translation that has been to the Chinese language originally were not from Arabic. It was taken from either Russians or other languages, basically, to the Chinese. So in that journey from different layers of translation, there should be something missing in between, or something being inserted in between. I want to find out about your comments about this, the second issue. Thank you very much.
جزاكم الله خير. دكتور عبد الله.
A lot of information.
Do you want to address one at a time? Or do you...
I mean, that wasn't one, so should I do it?
Okay, let's go.
I think it's a very interesting question about how maqasidi is his tafsir. It's not a question that I have thought about very much. Perhaps some people have, specifically done research in this question. My general impression is that the specific aspects of his thought on maqasid will show up in certain discussions, which are almost like the things that would go in the footnote. Whereas the translation process is more concerned with his engagement with the language of the Quran. There we could use the word maqasid in a broader sense, that he is looking at the purpose of what the Quran is saying, right? Rather than purposes of Islamic law, which is the more specific meaning of maqasid. Of course, he's very famous for having revived this field through his book, Maqasid al-Sharia. But in the sense that he is looking at the nazm of the Quran, the semantics, but also the pragmatics of the Quranic expressions. And those are things which, again, make it worth using his tafsir to help with the sense of, in English, finally connecting phrases together, which, as I say, on the selfish level, I'm enjoying it so much. The process of actually ayat, which I have read so many times, I have read the translation so many times, I've maybe talked about so many times, and then I'm like, okay, but be honest with yourself, Sohaib. Do you understand what this means? Like, do you understand how it connects? And then Ibn Ashur is taking me to a place where, yes, actually there's this new understanding that I'm getting from this, which I would say is the value of his way of doing tafsir, which is really trying to advance on what has been said before, really trying to advance on it. So that might not be exactly maqasid, but maybe something close. The other question, I'm not sure how to address this, and how maybe it connects with this project here. But again, the subjectivity aspect of an interpreter, here of course we are being upfront about the subjectivity of Ibn Ashur in particular, and saying that, okay, here we are relying on the fact that within Muslim communities, there is generally a sense of respect of authority. And what I mean is the authority of the learned people to speak on things like tafsir of the Quran. When it came to translations, I think that certain other factors have overtaken that, such as if it comes from, for example, my group or my sect or my institution, then I'll accept it. But normally a person isn't asking, but was that translator fully qualified, etc., and how do I know that? They're not asking that question. They only ask the question when I do a presentation on it. So because it's a new project, they're like, look at me, and they're like, you don't look like a mufassir, so explain yourself. And that's fine, but I'm saying ask that question of everyone that you've got on your shelf as well. But yeah, it's a very broad question. Maybe I just touched on a bit of it.
Perhaps I can also just add on a kind of tagline to that question, which is that you're translating Ibn Ashur, considering the global Muslim ummah, a larger number of its members is likely to read in English, is likely to be able to access something like Quran.com. It's quite plausible that people will be able to access Ibn Ashur's sort of interpretation of the Quran far more through English than they are through Arabic, by virtue of such a translation. Is that something you've reflected on at all?
It is. I've also thought about doing this in French. Not that I could do it, but I mean, once we do it, because he's got some connection to French and Francophone context. But maybe the next phase we could get a team onto that. But yes, I think that, I was once speaking with an elder about things that I want to do, and I said, I want to write a tafsir in English. And his response was, well, you're not Ibn Ashur, are you? So that's why I established the Ibn Ashur Center for Quran Studies, to send a message that I'm not Ibn Ashur. But it could be that the work that we do increases the benefit of his work and does things which are more beneficial than even writing the most magnificent Arabic tafsir could do. Because the Arabic readers are always a minority in the Muslim Ummah, and we have to think about what we do for the majority.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. I would like first to welcome Dr. Sohaib, my old friend.
Thank you so much.
In Qatar. And I would like also to congratulate you on your work, which already you have published with us at Qatar University,
That's right.
Journal of College of Sharia. And my concern here is to raise the point of how difficult is translation is. Not anybody can have this task or come to translate the Quran. And we have here one of our best translators, Dr. Lombard, and he knows exactly what the translator goes through. Therefore, I studied about, I published one book in Arabic. I studied about 62 translations. And from Alexander Ross till 2013. From 2013 till now, mashallah, maybe every year you have more than 10 translations for different people. For example, for translations for scholars, translations for students, even and for different purposes. The point which I want to make here, unfortunately, until now, we are speaking 2025. We don't have a collective translation. Translation, they say in Arabic, or it's in English, al-mutarjimu kha'in, which is in, I don't know, traductor. Yeah. Because the layers of the Quran, they are the words of Allah. There is no limits for the meaning. Sometimes you have 2 meanings, sometimes you have 3, sometimes you have 10 meanings. So Al-Quran له ظاهر وباطن وحد ومطلع, etc. Therefore, I am what you are doing is excellent, and it's the base for a collective translation, because you need in translation, as you said, many people, they say, okay, I have translated the Quran and this is based on this and this, and when you go through it and you see that there are many deficiencies and the translator didn't do the work as it does, as it needs. Because this is very, you are translating 6,200 ayahs. And you are in different status. Sometimes you are ill, sometimes you are comfortable, sometimes, Therefore, the Bible, the Holy Bible, has been translated by many people. It's not only, it's an institution. You have institutions for translating the Bible. Unfortunately, in the Arab world or the Islamic world, they are spending a lot of money in many things, but they didn't, until now, they have this issue of having an institution for translating the Quran. This is the point which I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Well, when it comes to institutions, I think someone in my, place in the world, my age, my anything, there's only so much I can do. So I do believe in working institutionally. That's what we're doing. It's also one of the reasons that I'm here in Doha right now, is to continue that sense of institutional connections. Isn't there a hadith that how wonderful is good money in the hands of a good man? So the good money needs to go to the good projects, the sensible projects. Too much translation of classical tafsirs is not the best use of it. throwing money at translation projects that aren't thoroughly well thought out is also not the way. But I think that all the concerns you raised are exactly my concerns, mostly which I did express. And this project, as I've explained, is what I see as a solution to those problems. Not the solution and the final solution, but it is a solution to those problems, exactly as you've expressed. So Allah bless you. Thank you so much.
Dr. Abdullah. Since we're quite short on time, I'm going to ask the three brothers, I think, who had questions. So the brother in the back.
Brothers, though?
Sorry? I think
The sister's going to ask questions.
and we'd welcome any sisters because you've not put your hands up yet, so please feel free. But brother in the back, brother here, and then inshallah. Okay, so if I can ask you to both ask one after another, and then inshallah we'll conclude. Bi'idhnillah. And any sisters, please please don't hesitate, inshallah. Bi'idhnillah. Tafadhal.
All right. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Maurice Hines. I'm actually a librarian at Northwestern. But I've had some ideas about, tafsir for a while, and alhamdulillah, you're actually, picking up on some of the ideas that are just floating around in my head. And I also have more ideas if you're interested.
For sure.
So my question is kind of a request. Since you brought it up, you have a translation of Surah Al-Baqarah. My personal research kind of revolves around the Sabi'un and the Hanif. So I'm wondering, how do you translate Baqarah 62 and Baqarah 135?
I'll show you after, inshallah.
Okay, sure.
I can't necessarily remember. And sometimes I don't even know where to find it. So, but I'll be able to show you, inshallah. So obviously 62 is the very famous, one where there's a lot of discussion. You'll have heard of this issue, Joseph, as well, regarding the reference to the earlier communities and what is meant by saying they will have their reward with their Lord. So Ibn Ashur's tafsir is I think, not unusual in this respect. He is with the mainstream interpretation, or a couple of possible interpretations that this refers to those who followed the message correctly in the previous times. And the connection that he sees here is that it's giving a little bit of comfort after a context which is very much heavily, pounding the Bani Israel for having deviated from the scripture. So it's like, but bear in mind that those who do right, don't think that just because you belong to that community, all is lost. What you have to do is have iman, belief in Allah and the last day, and do good. And obviously the whole Quran is explaining how to do those things, right? So I wouldn't say it's an unusual perspective that he brings, but I did find there was a helpful sense of what is the place of this ayah, what's the pragmatics of it, and I maybe wouldn't find that elsewhere. So there's a value as well in his analysis.
And finally, brother.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's actually a wonderful discussion, and we learned a lot about it. And actually, your choice is, I think it's a unique choice, because you're trying to combine the tafsir and the Quran translation at the same time. You have already translated the tafsir, and now you are trying to do both. And you're referencing to a well-known scholar, so to avoid any criticism for your choice of words, you've just referring to Ibn Ashur, and actually this is a very good choice, and is a unique choice. I agree with you. But actually, I don't have many questions. I'm a researcher in Quran translation here in SPKU. I'm a student, and I'm just was investigating about the ideological aspect, and also about the lexical aspects and the decision and the choices of the translators. concerning the ideological aspects, what are the main, let's say, main horizons that are, if you want to make a review of the 150 translation of the Quran into English, what can you just summarize them in like 4 horizons or 5 horizons? Like we can say, for example, we have Ahmadi translators, and we have rationalists, traditionalists, and maybe scientific rationalists. Specifically, what is your opinion about the translation of Jurans and Yüksel? Have you came over?
Of who, sorry?
A guy called Jurans.
Oh, yes, okay, yeah.
Jurans 2022.
Yeah.
2020, and another guy called Yüksel.
So I'm going to share something with you, and anyone can have it. I've written an entry called Modern Quran Translations in English, and this is part of a big thing that was put together for the online encyclopedia of the Quran. Johanna Pink is the main editor for that. So in that, I've talked about some aspects of ideology. I've talked about some factors in the motivations, state actors in translation, what they have done, some features of translation projects such as being collaborative. So Study Quran gets a mention in that context of being a collaborative project. And also it gets a mention in the context of being detailed in its footnotes, because the general trend has been towards reducing the footnotes. Whereas Study Quran has reversed that or done the opposite, which is to give as many footnotes as, expansive footnotes. That can fit with the very thin pages, yeah? So, you can see there about the ideology. Personally, I'm not hugely motivated by, I think the ideology aspect is studied too much and other aspects are studied not enough. But if that's what your area is, that's fine.
No,
but I have commented also on the so-called Quran-only people like Yüksel. In fact, I wrote a review of his translation that went onto the Global Quran blog, and then on Twitter he wrote a review of my review. He gave me 0 stars for my review. So it's a good review, okay?
Your choice of translation is very good concerning your translation. You are imposing the reader to read your notes instead of leaving them down, as you mentioned it.
Yeah.
It's smart.
Encouraging. Yes. Encouraging. Yes. Allah bless you. Thank you so much.
Jazakumullah khairan everyone for sticking around. I mean, this is actually, you've managed to keep an audience for a very long time.
They're all awake, mashallah.
Mashallah, everyone's engaged. Well, I mean, it's a credit to you because you've kept us all very engaged with your...
Is it recorded, this one?
Alhamdulillah, nah.
Yeah, good.
So we can...
Inshallah,
Actually, use dictation.
We'll be able to share this, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And I just want to thank Dr. Sohaib for making his way over here from sort of cold, darkest Scotland, as it were, and to the overly bright, overly hot sort of climes. Actually, alhamdulillah, you've come at a nice kind of like Doha spring, which is more like an Edinburgh, sort of like a summer, or soaring summer, so to speak.
Heat wave. That would be a heat
inshallah.
wave. Yeah.
And we invite everyone to join him tomorrow, inshallah, after Jumu'ah at the auditorium. It will be a much larger setting to see his presentation on Surah Al-Mulk. But aside from that, I just want to say Jazakumullah khairan, and I think he's earned a round of applause from all of us. Jazakumullah khairan. And thank you to all viewers.